It has taken a little while, but now it is finally time to complete my final review from the Brisbane International Film Festival, and that is for Pedro Almodovar's latest film, The Room Next Door. So, let's get into it. So if you didn't know, The Room Next Door is Pedro Almodovar's first feature-length film in the English language. He did experiment with this in his previous short film, Strange Way of Life, which I actually saw at last year's Brisbane International Film Festival and had a pretty good time with. So I was quite optimistic about this feature debut in the English language after making so many incredibly acclaimed films in his native language in Spanish. Now, that brings up many challenges. I am someone who is trying to learn another language right now, and it is extremely difficult. I have so much trouble learning how to speak and say certain phrases, let alone write an entire screenplay that has a lot of complexity and nuance to it. So I do have to give a lot of credit to Pedro Almodovar for even attempting such a feat, even if it was automatically translated, to try and get all of these themes across is something that is worth mentioning, because that is a pretty Herculean task. And unfortunately, it does come across in this film because, for the most part, found this film to be really weak overall, even if it does present some interesting ideas and themes that may connect with you. The film more or less is about two characters that have known each other previously and have been drawn together due to certain tragic events that have brought these characters closer to one another once again. You have Tilda Swinton and Julianne Moore, two fantastic actresses who I do think give pretty good performances within this film. And the ideas that this explores about death and the way that someone may view their life in these closing stages, where they're a little bit more optimistic about things and may recognize the beauty in some things, versus how someone who is healthy and has a lot to be grateful for can be quite nihilistic about the world. And you do see that dichotomy between these two characters. There are just some very interesting ideas here. The performances are really excellent. As I said, I definitely did prefer Julianne Moore's performance over Tilda Swinton's, as I felt like her arc was a lot more profound, as she had a lot more to figure out as a character. She has this huge fear of death, and being confronted with that does draw out a pretty interesting arc for this character that I did like seeing. And when the film would dive into those elements, I found myself a little bit more fascinated within the film. I also thought there was some pretty solid supporting work from John Turturro, who probably has not gotten too much credit for his performance in the film, but he appears in a couple of scenes and just provides a nice little dynamic with Julianne Moore and adds to the context of the film and what it's trying to present. Like a lot of Almodovar's work, there is a really great use of colors as well, especially red and green, and it does represent a lot for these characters in terms of what they're willing to sacrifice and how they are ready to be renewed as a person as these arcs progress. I thought it looked absolutely stunning, and I did think that this is where Almodovar is really playing into his strengths, and because of that, those are the moments that feel the most confident within the film, because as a whole, this thing is very shaky and does feel unfocused at times. Getting into a lot of the criticism with this film now, and it really does have a lot to do with the screenplay, unfortunately. As I said, I'm more than happy to praise the effort of Almodovar, but the screenplay to me is not very strong at all. I've heard so many criticisms talking about there's a couple of translation issues, and that is definitely true. You do see that within the dialogue, where there are just some moments that feel a little offbeat or quirky, and it doesn't feel quite intentional. And I did notice it a lot more with Tilda Swinton's character than Julianne Moore's, and I'm just wondering if the way that these two actors perform, it played more into Julianne Moore's wheelhouse as an actress than Tilda Swinton, but these are two phenomenal actresses and they do the best with what they've given, and this screenplay is weak at times. It just doesn't quite connect properly, and it's not just with the way that these characters speak with one another. It's so much more than that. the screenplay is weak and inconsistent tonally and structurally. The first act plays out with these series of vignettes, then it turns into a chamber piece, and then we're introducing new characters right as the film's about to end. And it's just not all coming together. I cannot really connect with these characters like the way the film wants me to, because it just feels so all over the place. And there's even some moments where I understand exactly what was intended with certain scenes. There's one between Julianne Moore and John Turturro when they're going out to lunch that I completely understood what messaging it was going for, and it really was hammering home that final point. And the way that it plays out is just so offbeat that it just feels like a what the fuck moment rather than actually being something profound that ties in really well with the screenplay. It's just a weird choice that doesn't quite work for me, and I do think you see a lot of that in Almodovar's work in his native language, but it feels a lot more smoother than what is presented here, because here it just hits you in really weird moments and doesn't quite work for me. And then tonally, it is so dramatic one moment, then it tries to be funny, and it just feels so all over the place. There's no consistency, and because there's no consistency, I found it really hard to be interested in this movie. I thought this film really dragged, and I just couldn't quite connect with anything it was saying, even if it was trying to be bold and did have something to say. I just couldn't be gripped into this narrative. And we're supposed to be hitting on these really profound notes in the third act, and I just feel nothing because it doesn't quite set things up properly. It doesn't do the right legwork to make me connect with these characters as much as I would like. Yes, there's some brief levity in there. There is some nice moments, like one scene where these characters are watching a silent film that I thought really worked, was quite funny at moments, and did bring you in a little bit closer to these characters in an interesting way. But there's just not enough of that to bring me in and make me hit these emotional high points that it so clearly wants to go for and be this profound piece. And in the end, it just all kind of feels forgettable, too inconsistent, and honestly, it was just too hard to care for these characters when it just felt like it was keeping me at an arm's length for most of its runtime. As a whole, while this film did present some interesting ideas, has something to say, and is pretty brilliant technically, Pedro Almodovar, I think, struggles trying to make his first English language feature here. I wouldn't mind seeing him try again because there are interesting ideas here, but there's a lot that needs to be worked on. And as a score, I'm going to give The Room Next Door a 2.5 out of 5. And those are my thoughts towards The Room Next Door. If you've seen the movie, let me know what you think about it in the comments below. You probably disagree with me, but that's fine. That's the way it goes sometimes. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.